Kiddushin Daf Pei Aleph Amud Bet. It's all in our mind, or it's all in your mind. V'lo yada ve'ashem. Tomorrow, Emir Hashem, we finish not only the Masechta, we finish Seder Nashim. It's an amazing accomplishment that for all of you, for us, those of you who are learning the Daf Yomi in full, those of you who are just doing the Matmonim, all the amazing ideas and concepts that we've covered through Seder Nashim. We were planning to have a wonderful event to create community where we were hoping that we would get together for a beautiful dinner, the families of the people who are learning Matmonim physically and those that are learning online, those that are in Eretz Yisrael or could be in Eretz Yisrael. We're hoping to have something amazing, but I'm not in that space. I don't think many of you are in that space where that's something that we are even able to do at this point. So Emir Hashem will postpone it. And there'll be a time when we're feeling a lot more spirited, and there's no reason why we can't have the occasion at that time and celebrate what we've accomplished. And meanwhile, we'll finish tomorrow Emir Hashem and then start Seder the Zikin, which is a whole new world that we'll begin with. By the way, we had the shiur yesterday, and I did it in Tefillah for a friend and colleague who'd taken seriously ill, and there was a wonderful turn for improvement yesterday. Can't underestimate the power of tefillah, but as great as the power of tefillah is, the power of learning for somebody, for the zchut of somebody, and being mitpalel together with the learning, that is just a superpower. And I know often people dedicate a shiur to a yortzeit or to a memory. That's a wonderful thing, but to dedicate it to somebody who needs it while they're living, to dedicate it for a brocha for somebody, that our learning should go to giving somebody a brocha. What greater brocha is there than a large group of people are learning Torah with the idea in mind of giving brocha, of giving blessing to somebody who's in need of that. So bear that in mind as well when there's a need. And Emir Hashem, may the zchut of our learning today protect our soldiers and be a brocha for them in the work that they're doing for us. We learned today about the power of imagination and how incredibly powerful imagination is as a tool to be used both positively and negatively. The problem is we don't often use it. We just default. Sometimes we let our imagination go wild, particularly in times like this. But we don't really understand always how to utilize the power of imagination fully. And we'll get some sense of it with a crazy piece of Gemara. And so many things one has to ask, and we'll only deal with some of it. There are two psukim that we will refer to in this piece of Gemara. The one is in Parshas Nedorim in Matos, that if her husband annuls her vow, you remember from Masechta Nedorim, but she doesn't know that he's annulled them, so she made a vow, he annulled them, she doesn't know that they're annulled, so there isn't a vow. She transgresses the vow, but it's no problem because there isn't a vow. Still, it says Hashem Yislach La, she still needs atonement because in her mind, imagination, this was an Avera. So that's what we're going to explore. What happens when you do an Avera in your mind? But in actuality, it wasn't an Avera. How powerful is imagination? And we've got a similar thing, V'im nefesh ki techta. We know that if a person does an Avera b'shoigeg, he doesn't intend to, you still need a chatat. You still need kapara, you still need atonement, even though there was no negative intention, but there was a negative action. But in the case of the asham talui, there isn't even that. A person eats a piece of meat, he knows that there's a kosher one and there's a treif one. We had this very recently, and he assumes he ate the kosher one. Later on he hears maybe it wasn't, maybe he ate the treif one, so he wants to find out what was the other piece of meat, the one that he didn't eat. Was that the kosher one? Was that the treif one? It's gone. There's no way of establishing, so now he goes through the rest of his life not knowing whether he ate kosher or treif, but it certainly wasn't intentional. It was neither intentional, nor does he know that he did anything wrong. Still he has to bring a korban asham talui. He brings a korban for that. So we see the power of thought in the process of life. And the case here is Rabbi Chia bar Ashi. Bear in mind who Rabbi Chia bar Ashi was. Rabbi Chia bar Ashi is one of the greatest Talmudim of Rav. Rav is first generation Amoraim. So Rav is a Talmud of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. So just think of think of the greatest people we know today. Think of the great people that we've had, the Chazon Ish and the Brisker Rov and Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. Then go back and think of the Chofetz Chaim and of the Vilna Gaon and of Rabbi Kiva Eger, and go back and think of the Rashbo and the Ramban, and go back and think of the Rambam and the Rif, and go back and think of the Amoraim, and go back to the beginning of the period of Amoraim. And there you have Rabbi Chia bar Ashi. Think of what a human being this is, what a man this is. Have a ragil kol idun, have a nafelape. When he did tachanun, have a Omar used to say, Arachaman yatzilenu miyetzer hara. Hashem, please save us from yetzer hara. So he used to say he had his own private tefillot. When you do tachanun, it's a great time to make your own private tefillot as well, to talk to Hashem. And we rush through tachanun very quickly, but tachanun is a time just to sit quietly and have a little quick conversation with Hashem and ask for special help. And every day he would say, Rebbeinu Shalom, save me from yetzer hara. One day his wife heard him say that. And she was a bit surprised because they had not had intimate relations for a long time. And she had assumed, as Rashi explains, that the reason was because he was old. Now she hears him praying to Hashem and crying out, save me from the Yetzer Hara. My elderly Rabbi Chia bar Ashi, my tzaddik of a husband who's too old to have intimate relations with me, what's he praying to Hashem to save him from a Yetzer Hara? What's he afraid of? What's he worried about? He's beyond that age. That's what she thinks. She thought she'd try it out. The fact is, he seems to still have a Yetzer Hara. He's still worried. So she dresses up as a prostitute and walks past him twice when he's sitting outside in the garden and he's learning. And she walks up, she walks down, and he gets into conversation with her and says, who are you? She says, I am Charuta, as a well-known prostitute. I'm just finished my day's work. And she seduces him. And she begins with him. And he's sitting out in the garden. And she says, if you bring me down that pomegranate from the top of the tree, then we can get together. He climbs up the tree, old Rabbi Chia, busy with his Gemara open, stops learning, climbs up the tree because he wants this woman, who he doesn't know is his own wife. He gets home and he's very depressed. She says, what's going on? So he tells her the story. She says, and it's so funny, she says, it was me, nothing to worry about, it was me. Now there's a question among the Achronim, did he actually have relations with her, didn't he? From the Meiri it's clear that he did. Whether that meant that he hugged her, kissed her, went further than that, we don't know. But he did something. There, the old man, Rabbi Chia bar Ashi, the Godel Hador, learning in the garden, gets attracted by a passing prostitute, so he thinks he doesn't know that she's his wife. And he's devastated that after all this lifetime of tzidkus, he falls that in his old age, he fails, he's devastated. She says, but it was me. He doesn't believe her. And she eventually gives him a demasale simana. She proves that it was her. Amala ana miha le'isura ichavni. That's all fine. So it was, technically I didn't do an avera. But in my mind, I did. I thought you were somebody else. In my mind, I did an avera, says Rabbi Chia bar Ashi. Kol yamav shel ota tzadik haya mitaneh. And he wanted to jump into the fire she was making to commit suicide. He was so devastated, she wouldn't let him do that. He started fasting and eventually died from the fast. He couldn't get over what he had done. That's Rabbi Chia bar Ashi. And then the Gemara brings, and says the Tanya, and brings the Ishai Haferim Vashem Yislachla, the case from the Dorim, even though she doesn't know that she's done wrong. Rabbi Akiva ki avamati lai psuka avi bachi. Rabbi Akiva used to cry when he read that pasuk. A person who thinks he's doing wrong, but it turns out he didn't do anything wrong. He goes into a restaurant and he decides nobody's looking. He'll order a nice treif steak, and he enjoys the treif steak, and then the chef comes to him afterwards and says, I knew you were a frum Jew, and I knew you were misbehaving. The steak I gave you was glatt kosher. You don't have to worry, there was nothing wrong. Still, you need slicha and kapora. How much more so somebody who actually does wrong? And then there's the case, the same with the Asham Talui that the Gemara Rabbi Akiva brings. Also the case where he not sure whether he's done wrong or not. Both are cases where the mind is involved, but in action no real issur has been done. Explains the Marshor, by the way, it's an important Marshor. I noticed that in the Hebrew art scroll it says she tested her husband, she was testing her husband, and that's what the Marshor says. That's wrong. That's not what the Marshor says. She wasn't testing him. What she realizes is, Ad hashtahav svara hada parish mena machmat ziknahu lekach lo kishta atzma kol otam shanim. She didn't put on makeup. She didn't dress seductively all this time because she thought they're an old couple, they're over it already. It's not what they're about. He hasn't got the strength for that anymore. And now she realizes, he davens every morning for Yetzer Hara, she realizes she has a different role to play as the wife. אבל השתא דשמא מיניה להתפלל להצילו מיצר הרע, יהא פריש משום זקנה, לא היה צריך להתפלל. If the reason they hadn't been having intimacy was because of old age, what's he davening for? So she realizes the reason they haven't been having intimacy is her fault. She checks it. She dresses up and she comes past him. She sees he's good, everything's fine. And she realizes she has a different role to play. Because what changes in old age is not that they can't have a meaningful and a beautiful, loving relationship of intimacy into their very old age. What changes is the testosterone. When a man is young, he's the initiator. He pursues the women. When he gets older, he stops pursuing women. There are other things in his life. He puts his attention into other things. He's not the initiator. But it doesn't mean that he can't respond to women. And that's why he davens. He says to the Rebbeinu Shalom, I'm busy learning, my head's in learning. I'm an old man, but save me from the Yetzer Hara so that I don't get turned on by somebody I shouldn't be. She realizes that and realizes that she has a different role to play. As they're aging, her role becomes more active, not less active. They switch roles. He becomes less and less active. She becomes more and more active. But their relationship can still be a vigorous relationship. That's what the Gemara is teaching us here. And we don't have time to learn. It's a wonderful Meiri, but what we do see in the Meiri is that there was actually a physical relationship. The question that I want to deal with briefly in the time that we have is the other question that emerges, which is asked. One asks it oneself when you learn this Gemara. That's one of the first things that troubled me. Is we had a Gemara back on Daf Lamed Tes. We had a case there where Rabbi Yaakov explains that when it says that L'man ya'arichun yomim, with kibbud aveim and with shiluach haken, that you'll have a long life. It's not talking about a physical life, it's talking about a life el olam haba. For example, if a man goes up and does shiluach haken and falls off the ladder and dies, how do you put that together? The Torah says you get a long life for that mitzvah. So the Gemara says, but maybe that happened, maybe there hasn't been such a case. No, they said Rabbi Yaakov actually saw such a case. So the Gemara then says, so maybe he was thinking something wrong at the time that he was doing it. Maybe it all looks okay, he's doing a mitzvah, but maybe while he was doing the mitzvah, he had bad thoughts. Answers the Gemara, Machshava ra'ah ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu metzarfa l'maaseh. The Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't regard a bad thought, a bad intention, as having been acted upon if it wasn't acted upon. That doesn't mean that a bad thought is not negative. Bad thoughts are bad for people, not good to have negative thoughts. But the Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't treat it as if you acted on it. Whereas a machshava tova, if you have a good intention and you're unable to act on it, not you just decide you're lazy to act on it, that's nothing. But you have a good intention and you're unable to act upon it, the Rebbeinu Shalom is metzarfa l'maaseh. Hashem regards it as if you've actually done it. That's the power of a positive action. It's in your mind, it's imagination. I imagine I'm going to do this wonderful thing and I envision doing this wonderful thing, but I can't get to do it. It's not possible to do. The Rebbeinu Shalom treats that as an action. That's how powerful imagination is. It has the same impact on your neshama as if you actually did it. You can change your neshama, you can transform your neshama with imagination. Negatively, Hashem, it's a chesed of Hashem that He doesn't allow it to damage the neshama in the same way as an action would damage it. But a positive thought is much more powerful than a negative thought, and a positive thought can actually transform the neshama. Asks the Iyun Yaakov. The Iyun Yaakov is the Shvus Yaakov, is the end of the 17th century, beginning of the 18th century. He was a Rov all over. He was born in Prague, and he was a Rov in Eastern Europe, in Poland. He was a Rov in Germany. He was a Rov in France at the end, in Metz. And when you've got somebody who, the Iyun Yaakov is on the Agadata of the Gemara, but when you've got somebody who is a big authority in the Nigle, in the area of Torah that is halacha, he wrote 3 volumes of Shailas and Shuvas, the Shvus Yaakov, which we use, which are very important in Psach halacha. And then he wrote it on Agadata. So the Shvus Yaakov is a very significant, that's why I curate him there, that he's somebody to take notice of. And he asks that question. And he answers, Kivan de lefi da'ato asta ma'aseh, Kivan de lefi da'ata asta ma'aseh befoil, betzarfen ha'machshava l'ma'aseh. Since the fact is that he did act on it. It's true that the action turned out not to be an avera, but it was an action. Then the machshava, then the imagination kicks in. So when does it say Hashem does not take note of an imaginary, you plan to do something wrong and you don't get the opportunity, Hashem discounts it. But if you plan to do something wrong and you act on it, and through no effort of yours, it turns out not to have been an Aveira, that the Rebbeinu does act, and that has a very heavy impact on the neshama. And he was so concerned that in order to do tshuva, he fasted until he died. He never ate again in his life because he was so concerned about the power of what had happened, even though that technically it wasn't. So we see so many things. We see it's not just about technical. Technically, did I do an Aveira? Is there a heter or isn't it? Can I get round? That's not about the technical. That's a piece of it. But what's going on in your head? That's what's important. What's going on in your head? You create the Aveira by combining an action, even if the action itself is not technically an Aveira, but acting out on an imagination, that creates an Aveira, that creates a negative force. And how much more so is that the case with a positive force? If you create a positive force in your mind, if you imagine the positive, and you can't get to fulfill it, but you envision it with your full imagination. Don't minimize, don't ignore the power of imagination, the power of envisioning. You can bring things, you can make things alive through the power of envisioning. But most important of all, you can affect your own neshama, you can affect who you are as a person by your power of envisioning and by your power of imagination. And particularly at this time, some of us who have the privilege and the responsibility and the danger of being in the front lines of what's happening today. And some of us are supporting them in different ways. And some of us get frustrated that there's not that much we feel we can do, particularly people who are living outside of Eretz Yisrael, but even inside Eretz Yisrael. And that can be a frustrating thought. Don't think there's nothing you can do. You can use your power of imagination of what you would want to be doing, of how you would want to be helping there. Don't sit and look at the news dispassionately from a distance and say, terrible thing, oy, oy, oy. Feel what it would be like if you were there helping. Live that. Feel that, imagine it, be part of it. You don't have to separate yourself. You can be part of it in your mind. You can't actually be there? Imagine you there helping somebody who's been wounded. Imagine you there supporting a soldier who's doing a job of work. Imagine you there rescuing a hostage. It's you're there. Imagine, use your mind. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mitzaref machshava l'maisa. You can't actually do anything about it, okay? But at least in your mind you're there. You're not sitting coldly and just treating it as some kind of intellectual exercise. Not that I'm suggesting that any of us feel that way. We all feel incredibly emotional and sad. But it's not just about feeling the sadness and feeling the worry. I'm talking about something else. I'm talking about being part of it, at least in your mind. Helping and supporting and participating, at least in your mind, because look at the power of imagination. You can take something which is technically not an isur and turn it into an isur. How much more so you can take something which is a mitzvah, even if you're unable to do the mitzvah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzaref machshava l'maisa. The power of the mind is such that the Rebbeinu Shalom treats it as if you have done it, and it has the effect on your neshama as if you were present and participating and active even if you weren't.